Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to LiftFund's ongoing webinar series. We really appreciate you joining us today. We are about to start and bring our panelists online. So we thank you for joining us. And my name is Dan Yoxall. I'm Vice President of Community Relations and Development for LiftFund. And we look forward to you participating in this conversation today. Please use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we will work to get to your questions throughout the presentations.
Bienvenidos. Welcome to LiftFund's Diez y Seis Plática. We are taking a close look at the state of Latino small businesses for the last 6 months since the pandemic shut most of the economy down in mid-March. My name is Janie Barrera, and I'm the founding president and CEO of LiftFund. It is fitting that we are holding this plática or conversation on el 16 de septiembre, 16th of September, which is Mexican Independence Day, because so many of our Latino small business owners have roots y familia in Mexico. The pride and the grit that they put into making their dreams come true goes back many, many, many generations. The past 6 months have been like nothing we have ever seen in our economy, our society, and in our communities. Each of us and our businesses have had to pivot to respond to this change. That is especially true in the Latino business community, where families and industries have been particularly hit by the effects of COVID-19. Here at LiftFund, like the mom and pop shops and the larger businesses in our communities, we have really leaned on our experience and systems to shift what we do in order to continue to serve small businesses through our mission of access to capital and technical assistance. Like all of you, we have learned to do our jobs often from home if we are able, but most small businesses don't have that luxury of working from home. Just to give you an example of LiftFund's work this year, before I introduce our guests, in a normal year, LiftFund loans about $30 million to about 1,100 clients in 1 year. In the last 6 months, we have deployed more than $30 million in disaster loans and several thousand small businesses, and our work continues. I want to start by thanking our municipality and banking partners for giving us the ability to do this work. And I especially want to thank the small business owners, like our guests today, for their trust in LiftFund, and most importantly, for their belief in their dreams and their hard work. I am pleased to introduce you to 2 small business owners who have joined us today and who will be sharing their stories in just a bit. They are Cindy Rodriguez, who is the owner of Mission Glass Company in San Antonio. She's found a way to add to her business during this time. We'll also hear from Michelle Quiroz, who's the owner of Reserva coffee roasters in McAllen. Along with her business partner and husband, Danny, they received the SBA Lower Rio Grande Valley Small Business Award. And here to provide national perspectives on Latino businesses are 2 respected friends of ours. Noel Poyo, who is the executive director of NALCAB, the National Association for Latino Community Asset Builders, and Ramiro Cavazos, who is president and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And on a special note today, Ramiro is turning another year older. It is his birthday today. So feliz cumpleaños, Ramiro, and thank you for sharing your day with us. As you can see, you have other things going on in your life today, but we really appreciate that. And by the way, Ramiro was instrumental in getting Acción, which we were called for 20 years, getting started here 20 years ago when he worked for the Levi Strauss Foundation. So Ramiro, you and I have a long history together. Felicidades, happy birthday. Thank you all for being here. And to moderate our discussion today, we have Robert Rivard, Bob, founder and publisher of the San Antonio Report, formerly the Rivard Report, who is an author and former editor of the San Antonio Express News. Thank you, Bob, for being with us and for sharing your abilities and helping us with our discussions today. So I'll pitch it over to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie Barrera. Good afternoon to you, to our panelists, and to all the members of the audience. Look forward to spending the next 1 hour plus with everyone for a very meaningful and timely conversation. I will be looking from time to time at the Q&A function to see audience questions and work those into the conversation. I don't think I can follow that and the chat room at the same time. So if you chat in chat and place your questions in the Q&A, that will help us out a little bit. So I'll just start by saying how impressed I am, Janie, with the fact that you've been able to disperse $30 million in loans over the last 6 months, which has been an extraordinary 6 months for all of us, unlike anything we've ever experienced. And before we bring Michelle and Cindy in to talk about that at the grassroots level of actual small business owners, let me turn to Ramiro and Noel first. And if anybody in the audience or elsewhere is listening, keep your microphone on mute so that we don't get interference from other sources, please. Thank you. Ramiro, let me start with you. The U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce represents nearly 5 million Hispanic businesses, and as the former CEO of the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber, I think that you oversee 250 such local chambers around the United States. You serve as the head of that network. What are people in your very large and diverse organization telling you compared to what you were hearing 6 months ago at the advent of the pandemic and the social and economic shutdown? And I ask that question in the context that for most of the people you serve, PPP money is running out. If they furloughed employees, unemployment benefits are drying up. So we're really facing an uncertain future here in the coming months between now and, say, the presidential election. So give us a sense of your community and where they are today.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that question. And Janie and Noel and our business owners, it's an honor to be with each of you today on behalf of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Even before the pandemic hit in March, Bob, our businesses were struggling. Although the economy had the highest level of unemployment, the stock market was growing. The reason why we need LiftFund, as Janie knows, is our small businesses drive our economy. 7% of America's economy is driven by consumer spending. It's not what happens in Washington or Austin, Mexico City, or Ottawa. So, Bob, the businesses were needing access to capital, even though they were creating jobs and working before the COVID hit. Capital continues to be a challenge for all small businesses throughout our network. We have Hispanic chambers from Honolulu all the way to Rhode Island, from Seattle to Puerto Rico, and from Wisconsin down to the magical Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. And so besides capital contracts in federal government, state, and local, less than 7% of equitable distribution for our small minority and women-owned businesses were receiving their fair share of that economic pie. And then the third point is that we are still sorely underrepresented in our communities on corporate boards for the Fortune 1000 organizations. And so we have seen that play out, Bob, this year through the pandemic, that now we have a need for change that's permanent. And the reason why I'm honored to be here with you and with Janie is that although we can say the pandemic has made it very, very challenging, things were a challenge already for our 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses. But they're tenacious, they're optimistic, they're reinventing themselves, and we follow the grassroots messages from Main Street, not what happens on Wall Street. So, Bob, the situation was not the best even before this, and now we have seen that 27% of Hispanic-owned businesses across America, out of that 5 million, are temporarily closed or shuttered, and we need to really provide them the access to capital to get them back on their feet. So I wish I was more optimistic, Bob, but the environment for small businesses is challenging, in America and continues to be.
Thank you, Ramiro. And we're going to come back to your last point about what those businesses need to survive, much less thrive, just after we get a little farther into the conversation. Noel Poyo, let me turn to you, because your network of mission-driven organizations serves some of the most vulnerable communities and organizations across the country and in Puerto Rico, for that matter. There's a sense that we're in the eye of the storm here, and it's a storm that's been going on for 6 months, quieted in the short term by the primary stimulus package that Congress approved now many months ago, and that we're now facing a very uncertain near-term future. Is that your sense? What are you hearing from your members and the organizations you serve?
Yeah, Bob, you're hitting on it, and I think Ramiro brought up the very important point of what the context looked like prior to this crisis, much less now that we're in the storm, as you said. Just to help with a little bit of context, the NALCAB network is more than 120 community-based organizations around the country working to advance affordable housing, to invest in small businesses and strengthen the balance sheet of families. More than half of our organizations are serving very small businesses, micro businesses, sole proprietors. And at that end of the spectrum, of the economic spectrum, we're seeing a lot of suffering. Many of the sole proprietors and businesses with maybe 10 or fewer or 20 or fewer employees, really the CARES Act did not reach them. The federal stimulus missed them entirely. And if you can't access unemployment benefits because you're a small business person, and you didn't get the Paycheck Protection Program because you didn't have a relationship with a bank, because you didn't have the necessary paperwork in time, then really your crisis began, as soon as this pandemic started. And to bring that to a larger context, small business owners are also homeowners and renters, right? And so the housing crisis is also really a complicating factor for many business owners. We're seeing while there have been eviction moratoria and there have been efforts to sort of push off foreclosures, we see delinquencies are very high and non-payment of rent has gone way up. At some point, the shoe will drop, and we will end up with people not able to pay their mortgages and getting foreclosed on, not being able to pay their rent and ending up being evicted. San Antonio is a really, in my view, this is my hometown and where I grew up, but I think it's a really instructive place to focus on when we think about our economy, right? Because in NALCAB, we think of our mission is to strengthen the economy by advancing economic mobility for Latino communities. And implicit in that mission, right, is this macroeconomic perspective that our economy as a whole, everybody here, right, not just African Americans, the entire economy is not going to meet its potential. Our entire competitiveness as an economy, as a country, relies on the people who are the growing part of the current economy, and especially a huge part of our future economy. Those people being able to advance economically. And in San Antonio, our demographics are such that we're a majority minority city by a long way. We're a small business town. We're a working class town, right? And so it's if you can move San Antonio forward economically, that's really a formula that can move this country forward. And so I hope we'll talk more about this. But I think it's a terribly important point to be clear on, that we are not at the beginning of a crisis. We're in the eye of the storm, as you said, Bob, right? And if we don't see some action at the federal level to really support the incomes of families and support the survival of small businesses, we're going to be in the kind of trouble that the Great Recession will look like a blip in comparison.
Janie Barrera, let me bring you back into this conversation, because LiftFund has had a remarkable rate of success over the years in not only making loans, but in loans being paid back successfully. And I wonder whether or not you're hearing from your network a higher level of stress about their ability to meet their obligations than you've heard in the past? And if so, how you're addressing that?
Yeah. You know, Bob, LiftFund was started 26 years ago for the reason that minorities and specifically Latinos, because 82% of our portfolio is to minorities at LiftFund. So we've been working in this kind of stressful situation of providing access to capital for many years. Now add this to it, it's just like amazing. And what I've seen though is there is a resilience, and there is a relationship between our loan officers and the small businesses. If it wasn't for that, I think they would just throw their hands up and say, I don't know what else to do. But I'm seeing now that it's not only access to capital that they're requiring, the Latino businesses, but they're also requiring additional financial education and being able to say, what are my next steps? How else can I improve my business? So it's not just surviving, right? I mean, we always talk about thriving and surviving. I like to use those words, and we're having to do both right now because we've run out of capital. You were applauding that we had put out 30 million in loans, and we put out another, 35 or whatever in grants, right, from municipalities and so on. But the need is fourfold. Though we've gotten more requests than we have dollars. So that shows the necessity for us to come together, work together about how do we level that financial playing field to move forward.
Well, if we have any philanthropists or donors in the audience, I hope you were just inspired to take action. Ramiro, take us to Capitol Hill. Because the U.S. Hispanic Chamber certainly serves as the lobbying arm of so many of those businesses. Do you have any sense at all, particularly in an election year where I assume both candidates are highly sensitive to the ebb and flow of small business economics and workforce issues? Do you see the Senate and House coming together in the near term to come up with any kind of substantial package?
Well, Bob, I know that in Washington, we lobbied hard right as the pandemic took effect in early to mid-March with both parties. We're a nonpartisan national business association. And quite frankly, we've seen where neither of the two parties, the Democrats or the Republicans, have really done their fair share to establish strength in our small business community, especially our minority and women-owned businesses. We have seen, to answer your question, since the first 30 to 60 days that the CARES Act was passed and the HEROES Act and the initial stimulus funding, really the cover's off the ball. The magic, of the partnership between both sides of the aisle has really tremendously. The first 30 to 60 days, people were working together. The pandemic was in highest of crisis modes. We didn't know what was going to happen as a nation, and this is now a global impact. And our members, especially with the words that Noel shared with his network, we saw that unless you had a relationship with a bank, even though the Paycheck Protection Program put billions of dollars out there, less than 1% during round one and round two went to Hispanic-owned businesses, less than $4 billion. About 52,000 total loans were made to our Hispanic-owned businesses, and only half of our business owners had a banking relationship. And if you did not have that banking relationship, you did not get a response when you applied for the Paycheck Protection Program. It was the larger businesses that were receiving attention and the streamlined loan process. Only 4% of the 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses in America before COVID were $1 million and above in sales. So the work that LiftFund does, the work that we do, and the work that NALCAB does is ever more present and important today, because we are trying to grow businesses. We're trying to scale them. and get them to the next level. And I don't see in Washington, unless they strengthen the loan forgiveness policies that were intended to provide assistance to our small business owners. I right now, Bob, see that there's an impasse until this election is over. And quite frankly, we're talking to both sides, both parties, and I don't see that the Latino business community is the priority that it should be. We're the economic engine of this nation's future. Raw numbers show that we're 61 million, 1 out of every 6 people, and our economic impact at $2.3 trillion as a community is larger than the whole nation of India with 1.3 billion people and that economy. So they haven't woken up yet, Bob, and we're going to need Washington to respond. And right now, we just don't see the responsiveness being committed. And that's why, as Janie said, municipal governments, philanthropists have stepped up to provide lending to those that have been unbanked for many, many years. And so the community is coming together. They do have the grit, and we are tenacious, and we're not going to give up. And this is our country too. We were here 500 years ago and founded it, but we need to realize that right now we need to reinvent ourselves. And thanks to LiftFund and many other groups like Noel's, we hope and pray that we'll come out stronger, when this COVID crisis, the transmission of this virus, hopefully ends sooner than later.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add on something about the PPP process? Because LiftFund was an administrator of the PPP loans. And it was so difficult to reach the Latino community, small business owners, because they work on 1099s, a lot of sole entrepreneurs. And so being able to work with them on that line 31 on your Schedule C was like foreign language. And so the way that PPP program was structured was not identifying the very micro small businesses that are needing this help right now. And I'm hoping that we can work with the SBA to change that in the future.
Noel, while we wait for more federal aid that may or may not come, let's talk about some of the activity locally in your hometown and our town, specifically the city of San Antonio, which is dedicating tens of millions of dollars to workforce development and affordable housing initiatives. It's a not a fully formed plan yet, but the determination to spend the money and to, in fact, ask voters to continue for 5 years and dedicate 1/8 cent of the sales tax to the initiative is there. Does that represent for you something that will scale up to significant assistance and make a difference?
Yeah, so I may start at federal and make a comment, and then bring us to local. NALCAB published a Latino Economic Agenda, which is a broad federal domestic economic policy document. It can be found on our website at nalcab.org. And one of the things that we're really focused on there is really transforming the SBA and the way the federal government invests in small business. Ramiro was talking about the ways in which Latino businesses have not had access during the crisis, but of course that reflects exactly what was going on before the crisis. Our financial system is not reaching many of our smallest business owners, as Janie described, people who are 1099 entrepreneurs and micro business owners. And so we're really going to need to get serious about how capital flows, right? So appropriation, just saying, well, we've got a bunch of money for small business. Well, that's great. But then where is it going? And what's your definition of small business? And if you want to get to this segment of small business and that segment, you might need different channels for delivering it, right? That's the sort of depth that we're going to have to get to. And it's on that point that I want to bring us to the local. So I think the commitment to addressing affordable housing, to investing in small businesses and workforce development by the city is admirable and important. But we have to put as much emphasis after we just get that commitment to put the dollars out, right? We're going to have to follow through and watch, how are these dollars being delivered? Are they being impactful? And so, you know, that question of accountability sometimes turns into a gotcha game. You know, we go and we get, you know, inspector generals out there who are going to go and make their career by stringing somebody up because, you know, 15 cents was spent poorly. It's very important that we differentiate between what is fraud, what is government based. Those are things we really want to go after people with. But on the other hand, we need to differentiate that between systems that are growing, right? Where you may have some inefficiency as you build local capacity to address an issue that has not been addressed seriously by local or federal government over the course of many decades, right? And those are really different. And sometimes that process of accountability is used as a tool of sort of stopping our progress and pointing to government and saying government doesn't work. When in fact, there are moments where corporate and private philanthropy, for as important as it is for wealthy people to open their hearts and their pocketbooks, it is no substitute for the role of government to step in and strengthen an economy when the economy is in free fall, and then recovering from that free fall at a level that's just way below where we started. So those can be complex issues, right? But if we're not willing to, as public leaders and as voters, sort of follow through on that, right? Then I think it's challenging. I think it's challenging. But I am very optimistic that the city of San Antonio and that the county knows who lives here. That this is, as I said, a town of small business owners and of working class folks, and folks who are not, don't have tons of extra after the take home pay, especially now, to spend on things other than food and rent and keeping the business going. And so I think that core recognition is there in terms of this kind of commitment that the city has made. Let's just keep encouraging and supporting the city and the county to get it right, to make sure that where there are mistakes, we're willing to be transparent about those mistakes and move them forward, and not look for the gotcha games, which unfortunately I think sometimes is what we see in the public eye too much when we're trying to support people that our government hasn't supported in the past.
I think you bring up two important points, Noel, that we should keep front of mind throughout the conversation. One, of course, is that in October of last year, the U.S. Census elevated, if that's the right word, San Antonio to the #1 position as the city with the highest percentage of people living below the poverty line, which is a terrible distinction. And even though we were #2 before we were #1, both rankings are unacceptable, and they show how vulnerable our community is. And the second issue that you bring up is accountability. And I know I've written about it, and other people have brought up the issue of the accountability as city council does apply tens of millions of dollars to these workforce development programs. But it should also go noted that there was widespread fraud and abuse of the PPP program by very wealthy corporations and individuals, billionaires and others, who received massive loans. And some of them were forced in the court of public opinion to return the money because it was so undeserved and unnecessary. But many others, including entities in San Antonio, did not return the money. And when we talk about the tens of thousands of Hispanic businesses that did not qualify because they didn't have a bank relationship, or they weren't able to get the paperwork in, they didn't have the administrative support they needed. We look at a lack of accountability for the CARE Act, that in fact billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars was wasted in that could have gone to more worthy recipients in our community and others. Janie, before we bring in our small business partners to broaden the conversation, what will you do in terms of the next 6 months, given the fact that your treasury is empty at the moment, yeah, and the demand is only going to intensify?
Yeah. Within the next 6 months, our role, I'll talk here about specifically San Antonio, since our footprint is 13 states, but since we're talking about San Antonio, is that we've been given the responsibility of administering $23 million where there's like $200 million worth of need. And so we are taking the best steps that we can to be able to work with the small businesses that can be successful 6 months from now and 12 months from now. We're also working with the community's leaders because they're asking, if you were to get X amount of dollars, either through investments or through donations, how can you change the trajectory of these businesses? Show us what you can do. And so I applaud that challenge that they've given us. And so more to come, Bob, on what collectively we can do in our communities to work together by injecting not only capital, but education.
Okay, great. I think our audience now can see our small business owners. Welcome Cindy Rodriguez from Mission Glass here in San Antonio, and welcome Michelle Quiroz from the Reserva Coffee Roasters in McAllen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. It's great to have you with us today. And I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to just talk a little bit about your respective experiences as small business owners, as entrepreneurs. And Cindy, we do that knowing that Mission Glass is a more established business and has been operating for a number of years. And Michelle, you and your husband launched, I think, in late 2017. So you were barely a 2-year startup when or a little bit more than 2 years when the pandemic hit. So Cindy, let's go to you first, because you you are in a business, I think, like Michelle, that I would constitute as essential. I think
yes,
whether it's glass in buildings or automobiles or homes, it's essential. And Michelle, I consider caffeine essential too. So we'll get to that. But talk first to us about the experience at Mission Glass for yourself, your employees, your clients, how you've done to date, and how you see yourself going.
I don't know how to start. The pandemic hit us hard when it first started. Our sales just stopped from nowhere. We had orders, we couldn't go into the customers' houses. Our employees were nervous to go in and service them. So having to deal with what was going around us with the pandemic, how to handle it, we knew something's out there. The PPP loan has helped us to move forward. Having that ease of payroll being protected, not knowing what to expect in sales. As soon as that started rolling in, taking the precautions, our sales did get stronger. As companies had to close, they were getting vandalized. So it boosted our sales to try to secure the businesses, corporations that were closed. So that gave us work to secure the businesses to going forward.
So the PPP money was essential for you. You kept your employees on the payroll throughout the past 6 months, and you're now operating close to normal. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, close to normal. It was easy not to think about payroll costs when everything is going on. So it helped me even to get a glass rack on my van, to get a second one going. I had already bought it in February. I didn't know what to expect. So it was just easy with the PPP to move forward and not having to worry about that hardship.
And did you have an existing bank relationship, Cindy? Did you find as a small business owner that might not have a lot of back office support? I don't see an administrative assistant lurking in the background there. Was it a very difficult thing for you to apply for and receive the PPP money?
It would have been if I'd gone through the banks, how everybody was advertising it. It was as smooth as can be from the beginning to the end with LiftFund, from spreadsheets to applications to if you left something out, they helped you, they guided you. They did very well. I've been referring LiftFund to anybody that I know that hasn't gotten any help. Very good.
That's why they've loaned $30 million in 6 months, because people like you are spreading the word. Michelle, welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us from the Rio Grande Valley. Give us the experience that you and your husband and partner Janie have had. You were just thriving as a young business, received the Rio Grande Valley Small Business of the Year award, which is pretty impressive. And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah, so for us, it was interesting because, as you mentioned, we were a young organization. We've been open for about 2 years in a retail store. And so we thought we had it made to some extent. You know, we were looking at our financials where we're getting to a point where we were profitable. And, you know, the economy shut down in March. And I remember quite well, March 18th, March 14th, those days where we just didn't know what was going to happen next. The shelter at home orders were issued. The essential clauses started coming out. And so for us, we just started to understand, are we considered an essential business or not? And so we were reading the county orders to understand how we could continue operating during the pandemic. And so we switched our model from doing a in-store traditional cafe to doing more curbside orders. We started doing delivery orders. And one of the questions that one aspect that we engaged our team is understanding what is going to make them feel safe to continue operating. Because we got to be able to take care of our customers and our employees so we have a viable business. So you can see back there, we made ourselves our own Plexi Shield glasses. You know, so we kind of went through understanding what PPP was necessary to continue operating. And so that really helped us understand and develop a plan to continue operating. So for us during the pandemic, we never shut down. We continued keeping our doors open. We were able to support the needs of the communities, particularly the hospitals, the essential workers that needed to get that caffeine going to you know, deal with their day-to-day jobs.
Michelle, I'm a little surprised in San Antonio, knowing what our small businesses and service industry people went through here, that you were allowed to stay open for the entire time of the pandemic.
For the entire time. Yep.
Of course, there were wildly different standards throughout the state. What steps did local leaders in McAllen take in terms of ordering stay at home, work, you know, shelter at home, work remotely? Did restaurants?
So, so restaurants that operated under takeout, delivery, and curbsides were considered as part of the essential workforce clause. So that was kind of what we went after and try to adapt our business to accommodate that definition that the county saw.
And how is the COVID-19 spread right now in the Rio Grande Valley and McAllen? We know that.
We had a pretty severe impact starting from Memorial Day up until July 4th. And we had some serious cases and a lot of mortalities in the area, which were very unfortunate. And it was just a very sad situation just to see how much the community is interconnected and seeing, you know, and hearing clients or even our doctors coming into the office, to the coffee shop, just explaining the type of day they've had. So it was very impactful, and it seems like now we're on the downward trend. And I think, you know, now that we've been almost 6 months into it, people are just trying to normalize their new normal, you know, with the COVID pandemic.
What was your experience as a relatively young business securing PPP funds?
Mm-hmm. So I have a relationship with a bank already, and as soon as the CARES Act was established and defining the PPPs, I mean, my husband and I followed all of the sessions going on, reading the CARES Act themselves, and as soon as the Congress approved it, we basically called our banker and said, hey, we're ready to apply for these PPP loans, and we were lucky enough to be granted the PPP in the first round of distribution.
And how did you use those funds? Do you have employees on your payroll, and were you able to keep them on your payroll throughout your opening?
Yes, fortunately, we were able to get our PPP very quickly. We maintain our staff of 10 employees. We have a mix of full-time and part-time employees. And so what we basically did was not impact them negatively in terms of furloughing them or sending them down the unemployment line. What we chose to use those funds with was looking at projects within the coffee shop, maintenance projects, or ways for them to improve how we were currently doing our processes, so we can, you know, basically keep them employed.
So the same question, Michelle, before we turn back to the others in the group that I asked Cindy, you're not going to get more PPP money in all likelihood. So what's the prospect for the rest of the year and into the new year for you and Danny?
So we've looked at how our sales are going and what our customers ordering, and we've been adapting our menu by introducing new drink formats. So if customers cannot come in on a daily basis to get their coffee, then we can sell them the gallons worth of their favorite drink. And so we've had to modify our model to continue growing or keep a steady flow of sales. And so I think we're just going to keep looking at the analytics of our business and adapt our business as necessary.
So, Janie, that must be interesting for you because you interact with small business people and entrepreneurs and startups all the time, but we heard two different stories of adaptation to survive the initial hit and then how to move forward on a different basis, adjusting the business models accordingly. Is that something that you're hearing over and over again, and that in fact that you're counseling small businesses to show that kind of flexibility?
Exactly. So for example, majority of the LiftFund portfolio is in a service industry. And so many of them were not called essential. But they had to adapt. So speaking to restaurant owners, for example, one of them said, I had to lay some of my employees off, but there's still three of us total that are family members. So between my relatives and myself, we are keeping this operation going through, like what Michelle said, through the, pickup orders and so on. We have examples of a business that used to have a dog walking business. And so obviously people are at home now walking their own dogs. So what did she do? She had to pivot, and she was able then to go online and start doing training available online for the training that she was doing in person back at her retail shop, along with establishing retail sales of merchandise that she had available at her shop. So as you can see, there are people that are that have had retail and have used online as a way to distribute. And then what also I've seen is that continuing again on that resiliency topic is the fact that business owners are working with business owners to encourage one another and to spread the word. And in some cases, they're joining forces. If you get one of these, you get one of these type of things online, because businesses are coming together and working together. So it's going to be very interesting. A year from now, we should have another seminar like this to see where these small businesses are, because I bet you they're going to have changed the way they did business, obviously.
Well, I think that's a really good point you bring up. And although it's very heartening to hear both Cindy and Michelle and their teams are not only surviving, but they're going to do okay going forward. Not everyone is, and there's already a lot of data accumulating anecdotally and otherwise on those that won't. We have a question from a member of our audience, Sylvia Sanchez, that I'll put to you first, Ramiro, and then Noel asked for you to react. In a post-COVID world, what type of long-term impacts will this pandemic have on Latino-owned small businesses? I guess, as Janie said, we're going to be taking that measure a year from now, but what's your realistic assessment of where we'll be in 2021? Ramiro, I'll go to you first, and you're on mute.
Looks like he's also.
He might be frozen.
Yeah.
Noel, let me turn to you with that question. If I can give it to you, and then we'll look at Ramiro coming back on if he can respond.
Yeah. Are you able to hear me okay? I dropped off there for just.
No, all yours.
Great. I think it's one of these moments where it really matters what our public policy response is, because it is clear that there are businesses that are going to be able to adapt, and there are businesses that simply can't adapt. And again, as you get to a smaller and smaller business or entrepreneur and workers, this is going to leave long-term scars. It looks like perhaps I'm not connected. Bob, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, Noel. Go ahead.
Okay. Looks like we're having a little bit of connectivity problem. I'm sorry. But I think that we're going to have long-term scars on the economy and on small business owners if we don't see immediate steps to take further action at the federal level. This is not something that state, local, and county books at this point are really going to be able to handle. You know, as you heard say, you know, it's the purse is empty, and this is the sort of thing that requires a federal government response, if ever there was anything, you know. And so it's difficult to understand, you know, how anyone at the federal level feels like it benefits them to spend any more time arguing about this, and yet we don't have a response yet. And so one hopes that we'll see a more conducive policy environment conducive at least to compromise of some kind in the very near future. But I am not optimistic, as Ramiro said earlier. Unfortunately, I'm not optimistic about where our small business community in this country, and particularly smaller Latino-owned businesses, will be if there's not action.
Cindy and Michelle, Cindy, I'll ask you first. Do you have a network of peers, friends, colleagues, others that are in Latinos families and that are in small business and that are faring perhaps not as well as you? Are you in touch with people talking about what measures you've taken to keep going, and heard anecdotally from others about what measures they've taken that have either worked or not worked?
Yes, my father is a small business and a friend of ours is a small business. It's important what Janie said. A lot of them didn't apply because they're 1099s, so that steered them away. So there's a lot of those companies that do 1099s or small contractors that did not get funded. So those are the ones that, you know, try to reach out and help them, whatever helped me, guide them to try to apply for LiftFund to get help. So they're not based in it.
What does your father do, and how is his business doing?
He's recycling everything, all the plants closed for him. And the other one is electrical. So a lot of the contracts are closed. Government jobs, they're not open right now because of the COVID. So a lot of their businesses has, you know, yielded also.
Michelle, how about down in the valley? Michelle's on, there she is. Oh, she's on.
Yeah, so I have several relationships with businesses that are next door to us. So we're all neighbors and we all talk and we just try to give a helping hand where we can. And yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was talking with one of our friends that has a vegan restaurant and just kind of talking about what's worked for me, what's working for her, just try to cross-pollinate ideas so we can keep going. My parents also have a small business. Surprisingly for them, they've done fairly well. They're in industrial construction. So from my knowledge, they have not stopped building construction. And I think they're trying to take this opportunity that the pandemic is going on to kind of further their projects. So I thought that was an interesting anomaly that I have not heard from the majority of the business owners in the area.
Janie and Noel, in talking to a couple members of the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber recently, a couple of them told me their businesses are still standing, but they're standing at the expense of their employees, and that they had to furlough employees in order for those employees to become eligible for the CARE Act extended unemployment benefits. They didn't have the funds to keep everybody on their payroll. That money is running out. At its height, San Antonio had 150,000 households with a newly unemployed person in it, which is a stunning number of people. Some have been coming back to work, obviously, as the economy continues to grow, but so many, particularly in the service industry, there's still no work in our hotels and restaurants. The bars are closed. the whole visitor and convention industry is still at a standstill. We haven't talked very much about the impact on the Latino community for people that worked at small businesses, but it's harder to measure, but it's undeniable that it's there.
That's right. And when I talk to the LiftFund team members of what they're seeing out there, because LiftFund right now is in the grant making business, but our mission is access to capital through loans and knowing how to use dollars well and to grow that business. So what are we seeing right now in terms of people applying for loans are people that were laid off and saying, you know what, I think I can do my own business and here's my business plan. So I think that that's what's going on in the near future is people that cannot go back to their jobs right now, want to work, are putting together business plans and working with us to see how they can start something, and mostly online, of course.
Well, Janie, my impression of the city council's allocation of workforce development funds is largely to training programs to enhance people's individual job skills and to get them out of the job they lost, which is not coming back, and get them into a job that exists. But are organizations like LiftFund making the argument that at least some of the money would be better spent by infusing it directly into your organization and allowing you to identify worthy recipients who want to transition from employee to self-employed?
Yeah, what a great idea. And also couple that with, all right, let's work with the workforce development group directly to teach entrepreneurship as well. Because sometimes they're teaching, okay, how to be a welder, or how to be a plumber, or whatever, but how about how to run a business? And then going through a program like that, they have a certificate. What if we had a separate fund just for those people to take advantage of? For example, in Houston, there's a program called Ascend that is Chase Bank is one of the participating funders of that, along with some community colleges and others in Houston. And what we've done is we've set aside some dollars just for that. They go through the training. They're now eligible to grow that business, start that business, and LiftFund is there for that. There's a program similar in Dallas that we administer as well, where people go through a program and then access to capital is there right at the get-go. So it's part and parcel of the ecosystem that is being taught for startups. Nope, you're on mute, Bob.
Janie, one of the members of the audience posted a question about what members of the audience can do to help Hispanic small businesses survive and thrive. Does LiftFund accept donations, individual donations, small, medium, and large?
There's a Spanish saying, hasta la pregunta es necia, which means even the question is a nuisance. Of course, we have a website that they can donate, and they can specifically donate to the Latino Fund. We let's just say a $25 fund comes in. You can say, I'd like that $25 to go to a Latino business, and we make the greatest intention to do that. We also have investors that can help. But the other thing that we can do, not only from donating or investing in LiftFund, is by us taking the initiative, each of us, even today, I know that go to a small business, a Latino business, and buy something, whether it's online or give them a call and take out a to-go dinner. But wouldn't it be great that if everybody went and just did business with the businesses that are open right now?
So just acting individually, if all of us do something one time, it can...
It's a multiplier effect, exactly.
Una vez al año no hace daño.
Cada año, hopefully.
Donations. Let me see if I have something over here in the chat where we're also getting questions. I'll just read a couple of them and then we'll turn it open to everyone because I missed these that were in the chat room. This is from Alberto. Speaking of government accountability, I'm very curious to hear ideas, takes from the panelists on the idea of rebooting a WPA style program. The CCC of the past bolstered parks and critical infrastructure. how could and should such a program meet the needs of the Hispanic, Latinx, Latino-X business community, especially young people entering a fundamentally charged workforce? I think there was so much talk about infrastructure investment a year or two ago, and it's gone by the wayside. It's a good question and one we should visit. And Janie, congratulations on your Spanish expression on Mexican Independence Day. And if you're a new startup, Janie, how does one approach LiftFund for funding?
Sure. So if you go to our website, liftfund.com, and if you look at, you would like to have more information, you can actually click and get an appointment and let's talk, because the spectrum is out there. There's funding for through an EDA program, for example, that we're going to be able to make loans at 3.5%, I believe it is, which is a great interest rate for small businesses. On the startup side, we're going to be looking at a way that we can invest and inject X amount of dollars, right? So the business plan is going to have to be very, very important. So working with our Women's Business Center or our Launch SA here in San Antonio, or if you're in another city, they have small business development centers. That business plan is the most important thing that you can do right now if you're a startup, is write it down. And 2 to 3 pages, at least it gets your thoughts down. Because even though we talk about grant programs, LiftFund is doing loans as well. And when we do loans, we need to get paid back because we are not a bank. We are a revolving loan fund. We don't have depositors that we use monies from a depositor to make the loans. We actually have our own investment pool. So the payment that you pay us back then goes back into that pool. So we need to be good stewards of the investments and donations that we receive so that more people can take advantage of that. So go to the website is the most important place to go.
I'm not sure if Ramiro is back or not. We lost him. I'm going to pose a question to him and Noel, both.
I'm coming on. Here we go. Here he is.
There's Ramiro. Ramiro, we had a question from the audience about whatever happened to the notion of a nationwide infrastructure investment bill along the lines of the WPA that helped lift us out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. Again, does the U.S. Hispanic Chamber advocate for that? And do you hear in an election year or perhaps a post-election year that something like that could happen and the government would create good, high-paying jobs that would catalyze the economy?
Well, Bob, I bumped off, and I wanted to confirm that the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has included an infrastructure investment from the federal government in our policy platform for 2020 and 2021, similar to capital needs. If we were able to give Janie and other community development funds like LiftFund $2.3 trillion, that's the capital need to grow businesses like Michelle's and Cindy's to the next level. They're very fortunate. They received the PPP funds, but the majority of our Latino businesses need that infrastructure for their businesses. And obviously, without transportation or good roads or bridges, our businesses are not going to be as accessible to consumers. And so, Bob, it is in our policy platform. To answer your question, there's a great need for that because, as you know, the last time we had investments at that level was during the Cold War in the 50s when we built our interstate system in America.
Noel,
I'll jump in on this, Bob. Yeah. It's interesting that there's been a lot of talk about infrastructure really for 3.5 years and nothing has happened. Connected to a discussion about crisis, is the question sort of which crisis we're talking about. Because roads and bridges and that sort of infrastructure, look, pandemic or no pandemic, they're going to fall down. And so there is a real need for investment in that kind of infrastructure, sort of regardless, in our ports and things like this. But I think it's really important to think about in response to a crisis, you need to move money more quickly and you need to move money in a more directed way to people who are underserved. And so community development financial institutions, CDFIs, that's a designation that LiftFund has, for example. not a regulated bank, but an entity in a community that's connected to communities, that knows how to lend and provide grants and all kinds of resources to people who are frankly not making it in the mainstream financial sector. And it's that sort of bridge up, right? The whole sort of American dream is, it's sort of focused on homeownership, right? But I think the American dream is really about economic mobility. It's really about coming to this country and having the opportunity to get ahead yourself and your children, right? And that happens through small business. That happens through getting a good job and buying a house and all these asset building sort of strategies. And so if we just have to really focus in an economy where we said this enormous divide, right, between people who are incredibly and people who are just working hard, right, but not getting ahead of maybe where they're for, that solution is about being able to direct strategies, capital, and resources to people in a way that we just haven't done effectively. And I think LiftFund is sort of a premier example. I work all over the country. I know CDFIs all over the country, and LiftFund always stands out, right, as this example of an organization that is not just, getting that little guy or, that small business ahead, but is doing a thing that is important for our economy overall.
I think that's very well stated and a good summation of the conversation today. We are just about out of time, folks. The hour plus has gone by very quickly. So thank you, Ramiro and Noel, for joining us. And thank you, Michelle and Cindy, for joining us too and sharing your personal stories. And Janie, thank you for having the San Antonio report be part of your program. And I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Bob. And thank you all. Listening to you all, I'm inspired and reminded that we're all in this together right now. The work that each of you do and what we do at LiftFund is focused on thriving. And like I said, not only thriving, but surviving. So over 26 years, we provided, over almost $400 million in loans and thousands of hours of technical assistance to 23,000 clients, of whom 60% are Latinos. We continue to learn every day here at LiftFund. I want to thank you all, our panelists, for joining the Plática, for your insight, your experience and commitment to small business. And I thank you, the audience, for joining us and for the donations we received to sponsor this event. This is actually the first time that we put out a donation piece to it. I heard one of our board members, Wayne Alexander, tell me, gosh, I could get in free and sneak in like in the movies, or I could pay a little bit. So thank you, Wayne, for putting in that little bit. I hope you continue to support not only LiftFund, but all the organization and our panelists that are represented today. I also want to thank the LiftFund team. You're amazing. Events like this could not happen without you. Thanks, Dan and Martha, and Lilian, Selena, and all your team members. Thank you very much. And I finally invite you, each of you, to join our movement at LiftFund. I saw some chats about one of the entrepreneurs here saying, hey, they told me to go to a bank. And I saw our response back to you, please, we want to know more. So we're here to help. So we're seeking partners and investors every day to assist small business owners through mentoring, donating to our educational fund and our programs and our loan funds and investors and so on. So I hope you have a great Diez y Seis. And Ramiro, again, happy birthday. You have a wonderful birthday. And I'll end with un grito. Hi. Well, everyone. Woohoo!
Thank you all for joining us today. And we just want to thank you again for all that you do. Bob, Cindy, Michelle, Noel, Ramiro, and Janie. Thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful day.